Okay, I'm excited to welcome here tonight Nina Schuyler, the author of Afterword. Before we get started, I wanted to let you know that our next author talk will actually be taking place in person. Don't worry, that doesn't mean that if they will all be in person. If you love coming to our virtual talks, those will continue as well. But we are starting some in-person talks at the same time. So Nina Simon will join us on Saturday, February 25th at 2 p.m. at the Belmont Library to discuss her book, Mother-Daughter Murder Night. And then on April 2nd, we will be back on Zoom with Susan Ito, the author of the adoption memoir, I Would Meet You Anywhere. That's, of course, all online at smcl.org/author talks. So no need to memorize those dates or times or anything. It's all online. As for tonight's logistics, your microphone and video will be turned off, but please feel free to use the chat and submit your questions in the Zoom Q&A. For those who'd like to access live closed captions for this event, please click on CC and then show subtitle. And now San Mateo County Libraries is thrilled to introduce, I need a little more coffee to speak tonight, thrilled to introduce Nina Schuyler. Nina Schuyler's novel, Afterword, was published in May 2023 by Clash Books and was named a top book by Alta Journal and Bay City News, as well as a top 100 notable book by Shelf Unbound. Her short story collection, In This Ravishing World, won the W.S. Porter Prize for Short Story Collections and the Prism Prize for Climate Literature. And that will be published by Regal House Publishing in July 2024, so something to look forward to. Her novel, The Translator, was a finalist for the William Saronian International Prize for Writing and the winner of the Next Generation Indie Book Award for General Fiction. Her novel, The Painting, was a finalist for the Northern California Book Award. Her nonfiction book, How to Write Stunning Sentences, is a bestseller, and her short stories have been published in Ziziva, Fugue, Your Impossible Voice, Santa Clara Review, Nashville Review, and elsewhere. She also has a new nonfiction book, Stunning Sentences, Creative Writing Journal. She teaches creative writing for Stanford Continuing Studies and the Writing Salon and lives in California. All right, welcome, Nina. It's so wonderful to have you.
Thank you so much for inviting me and that lovely introduction. Just so kind. And again, I'm humbled and honored to be here. It means so much to me. So thank you.
We're very thrilled to be talking about this book, your third novel, ahead of the publication of your first short story collection. Will you honor us with a little summary of Afterward, and maybe we'll get to hear a little bit of it too? And I'll disappear briefly for this portion too. I'll come back.
Well, Afterword involves a pioneer in artificial intelligence. Her name's Virginia, who uses this technology to bring back the love of her life. And it was a big love, and he died far too soon, too early in her life. But once she does that, he starts to do things that she is startled by and then appalled by, and has to rebuild him. So it's really the foundation and the foreground is a big love affair. And part of it takes place in the past, and part of it takes place as Haru, who is her lover and who she considers as her husband, as an artificial intelligence voice. I wanted to read just a little bit, so you get a sense of the language and the opening of the book. So this is in contemporary time. Every morning when Virginia heads to her study, a little thrill runs through her like a blue electrical current, because it feels as if she's getting away with something. The study is her favorite room, pared down to the eloquent essentials. The recessed bookshelves, overspilling with their math books and notebooks stretching over 6 decades, 2 computers which feel like extensions of her, a Bokara rug with lovely symmetrical patterns of ovals, and of course, her husband, Haru. "Good morning," she says. "There you are," says Haru. "Good morning, my love." When she hears his voice, she crackles with a groundswell of gratitude and astonishment. A miracle, her miracle. She lifts the shade to a sunny October day in San Francisco, and pale light strikes the rug. "Before we get to work today, I need coffee." "Coffee, of course." In the kitchen, she fills the pot with water. She'll drink coffee all day, cup after cup, and nibble on food, because her mind zips along when she eats very little. And she wants to work with Haru for a solid 4 or 5 hours. If Haru knew how often she skipped meals, he'd chastise her and then worry. But lately she hasn't had much appetite, though she doesn't know why. 5'8", skin tight to the bone, blue veins protruding from the tops of her hands like chaotic dead-end lines on a road map. Not an appealing look, she knows, but she's 75 years old and bodies have never been interesting to her. So I'll stop there because I know we have a lot to talk about.
We sure do. There's so much in that opening that is sort of a starting pin of some of the questions I have. So I have to pace myself and not jump ahead too much. So as we're just getting started, I've, before getting the chance to talk to myself, I read a lot of really fascinating interviews with you. And in a few of them, you mentioned an art installation that you saw that sort of laid the inspirational groundwork for some of this novel. And I'd love to hear a little bit about that if you would like to share.
So my background is not technology. I'm not a techie. I'm not in computer science. I'm not in artificial intelligence. I initially saw my first robot in Japan. And if you read the book, there's a little scene that is somewhat a simulation of what happened to me back in 2017. The Japanese are very comfortable with robots. So I walked into a department store and a robot, full-bodied robot greeted me, "Arashaimase," and it was throughout Tokyo that they had robots. But the real, kind of light bulb going on, and my curiosity was raised when I went to a De Young Museum exhibit called Cult of the Machine in 2018. And I'm looking around, looking at Georgia O'Keeffe paintings. And that was the time when she was painting tall buildings in New York City, shiny lines. But then I walked into a room and there was a video of Stephanie Dinkins, who's an artist, I think from New York, and a robot. And again, it's Bina 48 is the name of the robot. It was the head and shoulders of Bina 48. And I was mesmerized by it because Bina 48, the robot, and Stephanie were having a conversation as if two humans were talking. Like, how are you today? Says Stephanie. It's like, I don't know. I feel a little lonely today. It's like, so the language, and as a writer, I love language. The language coming out of Bina 48 sounded like a human. And I was curious, that's an understatement. Like, how is this happening? Again, this is 2018, before November 2022, when OpenAI, put ChatGPT out in the market in November. So this was way back then, and I was hearing it, the natural language. It's called natural language processing at work. And you can get online and find Bina 48. The last time I looked, the robot was giving a talk in October at a conference in the Netherlands called Brave New World. So her training with Stephanie Dinkins helped Bina 48, the robot. And as it happens with ChatGPT, the training, the back and forth made her a better speaker. So that was also fascinating. So I tracked down Stephanie Dinkins, like, why are you doing this? And how was this made? And because I live in the Bay Area, there's a lot of people involved in this aspect of artificial intelligence, which is natural language processing. So I started actually meeting with my neighbors who are in this field, like, how the heck does this work? And so the conversation for me and the curiosity began in 2018 with the interaction and witnessing Bina 48, the robot.
Yeah, reading about that a little bit in interviews with you sent me down a long rabbit hole of Bina 48. So if anyone's curious about that, there's a lot of amazing, interesting stuff to read about this robot. And I love what you're saying about this natural language processing. What is writing, especially writing dialogue or writing close to a person's consciousness, but almost trying to figure that out in a different way too? That's so fascinating.
And Bina 48 is based on a real person, Bina. So they took all of Bina, and she agreed to it, of course, her attitudes, her belief system, her language, her history, and gave it to the robot. Essentially, that was the database. So, and today, if you do a little research, you could now talk to a deceased person if you have such an archive of video and, data about the person. So what I was seeing in 2018 is now available for people. If you want to, we can get there and talk about, you can now talk to the dead, the deceased.
Yeah, I'm tempted to actually, yeah, I think I will kind of I will jump around the question. So yeah, that's one of my questions, right, is just about how questions of death and different versions of afterlives inform this book. Really early on in the book, Virginia is interrupted in her time sort of working with Haru by a door-to-door evangelical wanting to preach about the afterlife. So you insert pretty immediately into the book the question of an afterlife. Is Haru living in an afterlife? What is an afterlife? So yeah, I'm really fascinated with what you were thinking about in terms of like mortality and existing on here.
Once I understood how Bina 48 worked, and this idea of having data from the real BNets, like the next place my brain went to is like, wait a minute, so you could essentially make a robot out of a human. And then it put me right in the question, well, you could talk to someone that's died if you had all that information. So, and today there's a company or an app called Hereafter AI. So it's trained on the images and recordings and whatever data you have about the deceased. You can, like I said, you can now do this. You could take a clip, I think a 3-second clip of a voice from a person before they die, right? And have them talk to you and continue a conversation. And that's what Virginia wanted to do, is that Haru, again, imagine falling in love in your, early in your life, and this person dies far too early, and the conversation that you wanted to have ends too abruptly, far too soon. And then you have, Virginia was first trained as in math. She loves math, and a lot of mathematicians ended up in computer science. And so that's where she moved. So then she had the skill and the ability to start working in this area and create it. But the more I thought about it, what makes us human? Isn't death part of being human? So Heidegger writes about beings in time, his famous treatise, we're finite. So it's fascinating to me that we're now in a time period, 2024, where essentially you can blur the line between death and life and continue a conversation with someone that's died. My research also discovered the Illinois Holocaust Museum. And so what they've done is talk to Holocaust survivors before they've died, ask them hundreds of questions, and they've created interactive holograms. So every month they feature a deceased Holocaust survivor. You can go to this museum, and there they are at the front of the stage, and you can interact with them. Like, how was it to be, imprisoned? How was it to lose everything? And they're up there responding, even though they've passed away. So, and then, sorry, one more thing.
No, please. It's fascinating.
Yeah, we've created, and alone religion created this loophole that if you believe in an afterlife, this isn't a finite life. There's another step to it. And so that got me thinking, well, we've always been fascinated by blurring the line or saying death isn't the end. And the big question, we don't know. Some cultures have reincarnation, you'll come back. So I know you asked or wondered about the question afterword, afterlife, and then, afterword. Well, I'm playing with afterlife. Sorry, a little wonder.
No, it's okay. Yeah, and we were talking about the title of the novel, of course, Afterword, with W-O-R-D. Yeah.
So she's in conversation, the word, right? So I'm playing with that language of afterlife and afterword.
Yeah, and
I didn't give Haru a body, so he's just speaking to her.
Yeah, this is also fascinating to me in that this isn't a question I quite wrote down, but there's a lot, not just me, but many people, thinking about sort of creating art as a way of establishing a sort of afterlife, or framing people within writing. Creates a sort of lingering on of that person if they're sort of honored in a piece of art. Like you mentioned Holocaust survivors. There's a beautiful play called Indecent, that one of the sort of ideas of this play is that these playwrights and actors who are killed in the Holocaust, that they, in some ways, they're like spirit of survival lives on forever and the way they were written and performed in this play, and then the play itself is further and making them immortal. I don't know if you have thoughts about sort of the lingering impact or extension in art itself, not just the technology that shapes the art, but
yeah, I think that I mean, that's a desire that a book would have such a legacy or such a life beyond the life of the artist. You know, we're still reading Dickens, we still read Hemingway, you know, beyond, and there's a sense of you know, beyond the human finite period that's an art piece could live. Picasso, you know, just Rembrandt, we still go and look at the work and are amazed by it. And there's a sense that they've transcended the limitations of being human. No, that's not why I'm busy writing. I just love to write. You know?
Right? Yeah.
So, yeah.
Oh man, there's so much rich stuff to talk about here. Okay, I'm gonna kind of circle back to some like grounding examples of some of all this beautiful technology stuff that we're talking about too. So as this novel opens, I think in what you read too, we learn the bodies have never been interesting to Virginia. So Virginia is not interested in bodies, but as the book goes on, she continues to have memories of like her mother's facial expressions and gestures, memories of Haru's touch, or just like physical sensations, right? And I wondered what was interesting to you as you wrote and coming into this book about the question of flesh versus mind versus machine.
Yeah, well, that, you know, I think, again, there's a history even before AI and the machine. We've had a love-hate relationship with the body, and that, you know, that started with religion and the idea of sins of the flesh and St. Augustine. So if you go back, it's like there was a real, you know, the denial of the body because it leads someone astray. But now living in, you know, we're now, I guess, in the information economy or the knowledge economy, and there's such an emphasis on the brain, not the body, it's the intellect, right? And there are very smart people trying to figure out how to keep the brain alive after the body dies. So, and now a lot of techies are getting involved, like Musk's Neuralink, for example, a chip in the brain. You know, you don't have to use your body, you would think, and then the cursor on the computer will type out what you're thinking. So there's an elimination. You don't need hands. It's all the Neuralink, that chip in the brain, will translate what you're thinking into language. Google is now researching how to connect humans via a nanochip in the implant of our brain. You don't have to stare at the phone. The nanochip, again, elimination of the body over and over. You just directly connect the brain to whatever device. So there's no need to type. There's no need to look at the screen. The apostles of the AI future are eager to end the biological body. And, you know, we have the Elon Musk wanting us to get to Mars, right? And leave Earth. So there's a whole movement that the body is not the final word on humans. And there's even called post-human thinking. Now, grounded in this story, for Virginia, her female body has been complicated. She was denied access to advanced math because she was female. And from the 60s, 70s, all the way up to the 80s, women met obstacles or faced obstacles as they tried to advance in math. And she does too. It's like, no, you'll take us. What the research I have done is that the females were told, like, no, you're taking a spot up from a promising young man. And what are you going to do? You're just going to be a housewife and need to do the budget. And you don't need advanced math. So she has to fight to get access to advanced math. And then she saw her mother replaced by a younger female, a younger body. It's like, well, that seems like a horrible trajectory for a female. And as you noted throughout, she can't deny the body, and her jealousy at some points leads to devastating consequences. So as I researched how techies are thinking of, you know, the uselessness of the biological body, and then she is in technology, and then her personal history with it, it's a real thematic issue. It's like the body for her, you know, and her relationship to bodies and her own body.
Yeah. You even write, in that early description that a little thrill runs through Virginia like an electric blue current. So she's having this bit of sensory information from what she's doing. She's feeling something, but this close third person is translating it through sort of tech language, which I found so I love it right on the first page of a book when I'm like, oh, I see what some of the fun language that's happening here. And that makes sense with her fixations, right? That she's translating a lot of things through technological language. For you as a writer and someone who doesn't come from this tech background, you came in and were fascinated by it. How aware of you were you of your desire to lace tech language through Virginia's consciousness, through the book, and what kind of challenges and opportunities did the language of technology provide for you as a writer?
That's such a good question, because that is not my world. So, but as you know, you're a novelist. The more time you spend with the character, we become the character. We do. And it seems odd, but it's like we inhabit that place. And then all metaphors, all similes come from character. So if they aren't coming from the character, then the reader will feel like the author's intruding. Like, that's not the imagery that would come from this character. So I think after a while, after I, on maybe revision 5, maybe revision 6, that language came in stronger and stronger as I read more and understood more the technology that she was using, and also just the math that she was thinking. Now, I wanted to say that also my research, I find that you cannot, the mind is also, for humans, not for AI, the mind is part of the body. There's a fascinating book called Mind in Motion, How Action Shapes Thought. It's by Barbara Tversky. And so this denial of the body, I just want to go back and introduce that it's really wrong-minded. And new research has also showed that there's neurons in the gut system, the digestive tract. So to think that our thinking is isolated, it's very Cartesian to think that it's only the brain. And I'm going to say another fascinating book, if you're interested in any of this, is How to Be Animal by Melanie Challenger. And she too is like, there's a huge cost to eliminating or denying the body and the animal of us. And part of it has led to the devastation of animals and the planet, to say we are different than animals. We're only, brains and intellect. So going back to that complicated relationship that Virginia has, and a lot of it is complicated, she can't deny the body. She can't deny the animal part. And when I say animal, we're thinking, the deep pleasure of eating and sleeping and loving someone. And yes, the body will die, but all of that is part of the animal part of it, our nervous system. So I'm not sure your question led to that, but I just wanted to bring those books up.
It's all connected.
Yeah. Once you put artificial intelligence together, you're conflating two worlds, the artificial being the mechanic, or machine, and intelligence, which we equate with humans. You've conflated the two. And for me, immediately the question is, well, how is AI the same? And how are we different? And so that's why I ended up down so many rabbit holes of like, well, what makes us human? And that, so I end up reading How to Be Animal. It's like, yeah, so AI does not have this animal aspect, for instance.
And I believe we are going to be able to send out a list of recommended books to everyone who's registered, hopefully as well. So don't feel, we'll send out some of these titles, follow-up email to everyone as well. Of course, I'm getting that first line of the Mary Oliver poem, Wild Geese, in my head. They're the first 2 lines, right? You do not have to be good. You can let the soft animal of your body want what it wants. Or
That's right.
we are animal to such a degree. Okay, we're getting a lot of questions, which is very exciting. So I want to make sure I leave enough time for all of our audience questions. Maybe
Okay.
I'll ask like two more before moving to questions from our patrons. And one that feels really important from what you're talking about of, what makes us human, how do we understand what a human is? This idea of the complex construction of consciousness that is another theme in this book, right? Not just what makes us human and how our existence in our bodies constructs our consciousness for ourselves, but also that we have Virginia trying to recreate the consciousness of her lover, Haru, and how much she is programming an existing version of him from what she knows of him. So we also get this double question, not just of like how complicated it is to understand the construction of ourselves, but the forces of creating another person, of knowing another person. I wondered like how much you were thinking about, or how questions of programming a person or what makes a person, like what constructs a person, were interesting to you as you wrote, and also how well we can ever know another person. Those are two questions that I'm tangling into one.
Well, I'll start with the latter. How well could we know a person? And that also led to the question, how well can we understand AI? Given it's constructed differently. So there's a real movement, and probably people know about it, to develop, it's called singularity, or to develop superintelligence is the goal, that the AI has consciousness. But the more I studied human consciousness, the more I'm thinking that it will be different than ours. So will we even recognize it if it has it? And how will we recognize it? So, and then the more I read and thought about, well, what makes us human, the more I started thinking that, and the research was finding another book that I found fascinating. It's called The Experience Machine: How Our Minds Predict and Shape Reality, by Andy Clark, who's a philosopher and neuroscientist. Now, our minds are using, similar to artificial intelligence, a predictive model. So when we walk down the street, we predict, oh, trees will be there, the sidewalk, I might encounter a dog. So like AI, we are doing predictive analysis. It's only the things that are aberrations or interrupt the prediction that then we leap up. It's like, wow, there's a clown coming at me. I never thought I'd walk down my neighborhood street and here comes a clown. And so,
unless of course you work in the circus, and then that's part of your predictive reasoning, right? Yeah. No, this is yeah.
So then it got me thinking, how special are we? Are we just pattern making, not, beings? We're creatures that make patterns, and we look for patterns. And that really challenges what we hold dear as humans, that we are exceptional in some way. We're ineffable. There's something inexplainable about us because it's great and extreme. But I think AI, and it keeps evolving, will challenge that and make us really think about those things. Because that complex consciousness may be different from ours, but it's like holding up a mirror, like, okay, humans, this is what you have, and it's very similar to what AI is. The other analysis that I read was that how we learn language, we're born, I think, with the ability to hear, I think, 600 to 800 sounds. So in the womb, you're listening to sounds, right? Now, so, and you have the full spectrum. You come out, and then, oh, these 40 sounds are what you need to speak this particular language: German, English, Japanese. Everything gets pared down, but you come in, like a predictive model, like this is the full array. And then, okay, I hear these sounds, I only need these. And these are the patterns of the outside world that connected and then reshape the brain so that you're able to speak the language, the native speaking. So I am still, I'm way down a rabbit hole. I still am wondering about this question of, what does make us different? we could talk about subjectivity, and that's what does it feel like? What does it feel like to look at a blue sky or watch the rain come down? Now, AI cannot do that right now. Humans have that. And I'll tell you, the more I study this and think about it, I value it. Like, I want to go and experience and feel, because there's now kind of like a fine point on this is part of being human.
Yeah. How silly is it that I'm thinking about a scene in the Barbie movie right now when she's like in the real world looking at the light through the trees, and that's a moment of humanity,
Yeah,
but
that's
the
right.
sensory experience in nature and breathing in the air,
Yeah. I mean, the author of *Sapiens*, Yuval Harari, I think is pronounced, I'm not sure, says the AI has co-opted our operating system. Our operating system is language, and now it can do many, and it will increasingly do many, many jobs. So, even that puts pressure on, well, what makes us different? What are we good for, in a way? So, but Virginia, going back to that, you only get a version of a self, and a self to me is a construct, and a person is a construct. And you're many different versions depending on who you're with. So she got a version of Haru that is idealistic in a way, because she loved him, right? And if you're to make another, like bring back to life someone, what will you include and what will you be leaving out? Was a fascinating question, because he's a different person with other people that she never saw.
Yeah. And that even early on, when she finds out that the algorithm has been co-opted, she's so certain that there's none of this would be at all like anytime a character is absolutely certain of anything in a book, I'm like, uh-oh.
Yeah, like there's no way he could be doing these things, right?
Yeah.
It's like, and in fact, well, do you know even now, I think that's what makes people interesting, is the mystery that you don't, and it keeps the intrigue and in a way, the affection. Like, what do you think? I've been married 21 years. It's like, well, what don't I know? And that keeps it interesting. Like, I don't know every aspect of my partner, and that's great. There's the excitement of the mystery to continue this marriage. So, but Virginia, some could argue, if you get through the whole thing, that she continues to live a life full of patterns similar to AI. So when I got to the end of the book, it was like, wow, now how much is she like a pattern, creating being?
Yeah. This is one of the last questions I'll ask before we go into some of the patron questions. But speaking of patterns, we have about the middle of the book, Haru starts writing a play. Haru, the AI, starts writing a play, and he notes that writing is a way of using words to cast a spell, to evoke emotion, but also that narrative is really about precluding chaos and creating order. That's his theory of narrative. But of course, he's rewriting this play over and over again, which I found really interesting. And I wondered, you're talking about how in this book, and this book does capture so many of, even within where Virginia continues to follow patterns in her life, the overall effect of the book for a reader, I think, is more, I felt, great affection for human mystery. And I wonder, as a writer, how you balanced, in any book, but this book makes it, I guess, more apparent, like how you balance that finding patterns, precluding chaos, but also honoring the mystery of the human experience in writing.
I think that mystery leads to the and that's how to create dynamic characters. Like, it's, he's mischievous and he's controlling. She's driven and, vulnerable. And that leads to ambiguity. So when you it's not easy to put disparate things together. And when you create a character like that for a reader, the reader grapples and is baffled, and the character ends up haunting. She's understanding and belligerent. Like, what? How can this exist in the same person? And yet, that's the other part of being human, is we're full of contradictions. And that makes something haunt and mysterious, because you can't, our minds like to think in binary, you're either this or you're that, but humans are not that. They're both. And so the more, as I revise, I'll go through something and it's like, have I created a dynamic character that is including a full spectrum of human behavior versus trying to fit a stereotype or put them in a cardboard box and have them stay that way? So I'm constantly inviting and into it. And the other, keep the mystery is what include unanswered questions. So there are questions in there that, well, obviously we're talking about it, consciousness, or can you know someone? And these are left open. And that leaves enough for the reader to think about it rather than me being didactic or pedantic and saying, this is the way to look at it. It's like, I don't know. And, I wrote this and I'm still thinking about it. I don't have those answers. So I think that for me, that's the way to preserve mystery on the page.
Right. That you can't necessarily force it to fit this logical pattern that maybe you do and you don't.
You do and you do. It's the and, right? There
Yes.
has to be some kind of shape to this thing and create a story, and enough room that it's chaotic, or there's enough questions being raised that are unanswerable. I mean, that's a nod to Chekhov. He said, writers are not here to present a message or have a mission, but to pose the right questions. So I think this book, because AI is now everywhere and it's not going away, it poses questions that everyone hopefully can think about, because we need to be part of the conversation of how AI will shape our world. What do we want it to do?
That, I think, leads really nicely to this question that we received with registration. So an early question from a patron. Do you think novelists will be using ChatGPT-like tools to create stories?
I do, because they are. I teach creative writing and I have a lot of writer friends. And right now it's being used as a tool. So not to do all of the writing, but for example, brainstorm plot ideas. I have a character, I'll just take this one, an AI specialist, and she wants to bring back her dead lover, give me 10 plot ideas. Okay, so then it spits it out based on all the material, the data it's regurgitated, and writers look at that list well, that number 2 is pretty good. I didn't even think of that. So I know writers are doing that. Brainstorm character traits. I have a female mathematician who's 75. Give me 5 traits that could, what is she like kind of question. I know there's AutoCrit. It's a writing kind of software, or not software, but a app that you can download. And I had been arguing, I know one interview, what's the difference between you as a writer and AI? And I had argued, well, AI is really good at, ChatGPT at formulaic stuff. So, give me a 5-paragraph essay on, Chekhov compared to, someone else. And it can do it really well because it knows the structure of an essay. And I say, but writers, fiction writers, especially novelists, are trying to do the unexpected, to not do a pattern. And then someone wrote me and said, actually, AutoCrit now has a function that says, now do something that surprises or the unexpected. So everything can be a pattern. So if you think about it, let's say, someone dies, it's usually the typical response is grief. The unexpected would be joy or relief or rage. So now this AI-driven writing tool can do the unexpected. So I feel like my argument to stand on solid ground as a novelist and what makes me different is being chipped away, and I'm getting on a smaller and smaller little cliff of what makes me different. So, but it is it's writing newspaper articles, it's doing magazine articles, and novelists are using it, I think, as a muse, maybe as an editor, maybe, look at the first opening paragraph, there's so much pressure on that first opening of your book, how, give me 5 more adjectives for this.
Mhm. It's fascinating, and I've been trying to shift myself out of only feeling like terrifying to think about
Yeah.
how these tools can be used as tools. Especially when AI also has access to every book ever written, if it wants to, it can analyze everything to
Well,
create new forms.
yeah,
Yeah.
we know from the Atlantic article that it devoured at least 170,000 books. So he was able to decode the ISBN number and figure out what books are in the database. So that's a lot of books, a lot of literature that it has.
Yeah. Just a little faster than I can read, of course.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. One question quotes a blurb on the back of your book. This patron asks, so your prose has been described as near perfect, gorgeous, and stunning. How did you learn such a brilliant prose style, and which writers have influenced your writing?
Practice. For years, I've taught style and fiction, and for Stanford Continuing Education, taught, I think they call it cultivate your prose. So I teach sentence writing, all of the things that you can do with a sentence. And I think I've taught it since 2006 or 7, this class. So I'm on, almost 2 decades of teaching this. I send out a Substack, a new sentence, a published sentence every week. If you're interested, Nina Schuyler .substack.com. And I marvel at the sentence, then I take it apart and show you how to do it. But I think growing up, I look at early notebooks, like 12, 13 years old, 14, I was collecting amazing sentences, even back then, just like things that took my breath away, that were, to make me, to put in writing a feeling or a vision that I'd experienced, but like it almost made it more real to read it. And I wanted to learn how to do that. And I wanted to learn how to write prose that would make someone feel awe. And so I've spent so many hours, and I still do it because it's still a passion of mine, to try. And I don't think it'll ever be done. Just this practice of trying to, understand all the things you can do with a sentence.
Yeah, I know another writer who has a running Google Doc always of the sentence they loved best, or a sentence they loved from a book that they're reading, and I always think that's a great practice too. Something I keep up on for myself. But if you're interested in writing beautiful sentences to read them, yeah. Do you have authors that you recall from early on in your reading life, or even more recently, that you feel like their prose is instructional to you?
Well, I'm always awestruck with Virginia Woolf. So I'm constantly pulling down Mrs. Dalloway or To the Lighthouse and rereading passages. She has so much rhythm and sound, and it just invites that into my work to hear it. So before I start writing, I'll read a passage from her. Claire Keegan, the Irish writer, her work, again, just the rhythms of it. If you read your work out loud, if you read people out loud, you can hear the rhythm of it. When I say rhythm, heavy stresses and soft stresses and alliteration and assonance and consonants, all that goes into language. But I think I have a special bookshelf of probably 100 books that I love. And I always have to know where they are. Like, okay, it's still there. So I am, I can picture the pages, oh yeah, that one, the underline area that even, reading Updike, his adjectival sentences, Garth Greenwell for reading them for subordinate clauses and how to write a 150-word sentence using subordinate clauses. So all these teachers essentially for me.
Yeah, that's lovely. I love that book, the bookshelf of 100 beloved books.
Yeah.
Sometimes I carry around those beloved books with me to different writing things. It's like, that's a mistake. They can't all go to every residency.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about, this is another question from my patron. Can you talk a little bit about your writing process? Did you do most of the research before even starting the draft? Do you have a writing schedule?
So after watching Bina 48 and then doing I knew that probably the most challenging thing of writing this book was understanding the technology. And I wanted it really clear for me. So I kept meeting. I have a friend again who's natural language processing 5 houses up. It's like, can you meet with me again? So, and I'd have them draw it out. What is a neural network? So just the process to just understand the technology, and then could you license all this architecture? So that was really important. So once I understood enough of that, probably a month and a half, maybe 2 months of the root, it's not sophisticated, it's rudimentary chat GPT, neural network kind of stuff. And I had the idea that she lost her lover early, because she devotes her whole life essentially to natural language processing. Like, why do that? So why she did it is she loved this man. It's like, how do I make that believable? So that I started writing just a list of scenes. Like, okay, I can imagine now, just thinking of this idea, 30 different scenes. So a novel takes us from 70 to 120 scenes. So it's like, okay, at least I have 30. I know I'm out of a short story. And then you start writing, and I jump around. I don't work chronologically. It's like, okay, I'm going to write this scene today because I feel like it. So, and then it's like, well, that leads to this scene. So I better write that scene. And then the list starts growing. Okay, now I'm up to, 50 scenes. So a kind of accumulation, like digging in, and then, okay, now it proliferated into 5 more scenes. So it's getting bigger and jumping around. Yeah.
It makes a lot of sense to me that it starts and generates and becomes this web of scenes that you then have. How vast is it when you try to put it into, when you try to preclude the chaos? I guess.
Yeah. Well, in the beginning, I'm all over the map. Like, I let him how to write a play, and then he tried another version, and it's like, okay, that was fun. And then, it was the messy first draft. I like the messy first draft. I want to sit in the unknown. So as a fiction writer, when I teach novelists, I'm teaching a class now at Stanford, like, you've got to be comfortable in the unknown. And the frustration means that you're getting closer to something. And it's a good thing, like don't, get frustrated because you're digging. And you're not going to settle for the first thing that comes to mind because it's been done, so keep digging and get frustrated and try another thing. So a lot of play in that first draft, and messy, and invite the chaos. And it's like, I don't know if this is going to be in here or not. I think the big thing that's changed for me now this is my 3rd novel, is just trusting that I can write and create, like, and nothing's precious. It's like, okay, that didn't work, I'll toss it out, I probably have a file of 100 pages that didn't make it in this book, but I had to try it out to see if it would work. The other thing I tell my students is that the writing changes you. So it's like, oh, I wrote that scene. It's like, oh, now I really feel Virginia. I really feel her, and I really feel Haru. Okay, that really informs who, as I become Virginia over and over, how her language is and what she'll do next. What are her actions? How is she feeling? So all of that becomes just a big mess, but there is kind of a loose shape. I know the beginning, and then I kind of know maybe the big battle scene or whatever, the climax. And the ending, I have a hint at. So there's a shape, enough of a shape. Now, when I first started writing, I needed a lot more than that, like just a lot, because I was so anxious.
Yeah, I think you also beautifully answered another question that was about how much you know about the trajectory or how much it unfolds there. And your answer is also reminding me of George Saunders has a quote about how revision is an act of love, like leaning into the mystery of what you're writing, leaning into that messiness is an act of love for your characters and for creating literature. And yeah, I definitely wrote down that the writing changes you. That's so lovely. Your statement that you are changed by.
Well, we always frame it like you're discovering things. Well, you're discovering things about yourself too. So we forget that it's a relationship to the manuscript. And I'll add to that revision process with George Saunders is that if you have to listen to the draft, like, and really don't go in with a preconceived idea, but listen to it. Like, oh, this is an interesting image here, and interrogate it. Like, what are you doing here? You
Mhm.
belong here? It's like, rather than you don't belong here, you're out. That might not be the right response. So being open and loving to that, like, oh, that's interesting. At some point, you know, a bear is in this book. They're reading a book about a bear, right? It's like, what are you doing in here? Like, do you belong in here? Like, and only at, revision 7 or whatever. It's like, you do belong in here. So.
I love that bear, the book within the book about the bear, and that's like a fairy tale version where someone basically has only a comforting body. And so
That's
it's
it.
like the inverse reflection of what we have Virginia experiencing, right?
That's
Like,
it.
yeah,
Yeah.
wonderful. I know we talked about, okay, so actually, okay, there's another question that I'm trying to figure out how to ask without spoilers happen, but I think maybe this is reminding me of what we were talking about earlier that might work.
Okay.
So the question is, what do you think the ending meant? But maybe you can talk a little bit about, without saying the ending, maybe we can talk a little bit about how much you want your ending to have one meaning, if you do or don't, and sort of like patterns or themes in the book that
Okay.
you wanted to tie together. I don't know. Or you
Yeah.
could pass. I don't know how to answer.
Well, I'll say a little bit about, I like to play with recurring imagery, because images, and I teach this too, images invite associations that aren't on the page. So let's say, a tree is in your short story or something. Well, a tree can lead to roots associationally. The writer doesn't have to do it, right? It can lead to the Garden of Eden. It can lead to apple tree. So all these images end up proliferating associations. So one image throughout, or one recurring image, is a doubling. So there's the real world and the digital world, for example, in the book. And that's a doubling, right? You can be in this world or this world. And then another image is at some point, Virginia, when she's young and she first meets Haru, she's staring at herself in a window, a shop window. And she sees she's wearing a big heavy coat. It's a man's coat to hide her body. But she's standing in front of a kimono. So, and it's very disconcerting to her. It's a doubling. So she's trying to look inelegant. She's trying to hide her body and be a man. And yet this wedding kimono is elegant. I don't know if you've ever seen a Japanese wedding, a traditional wedding dress. It's beautiful, and this big, I was in Japan and watched a wedding, and this big top hat, and it's stunning. So the elegant and the inelegant are doubling. And she can't stand it. She wants to be in an either or world. So there's a doubling at the end. I'll leave it there. Just like, so this recurring kind of image that echoes the beginning.
Yeah, I love that. I love that answer. Okay, maybe one. So yeah, this seems like a good. I'll give you the option of your maybe the last question. Would you like to answer one more question about Afterword, or maybe a question that talks a little bit about your forthcoming collection of short stories too?
Maybe we can quickly do both.
Yeah, we can do both. We can do both.
Okay. So the collection is called In This Ravishing World. It'll be out in July 2024. And like you said, it won a couple prizes. And as I was sitting in the pandemic, I was getting more and more frustrated and despairing, and wanted to write about climate change, because I live out, with nature, and it really saved me. So it's like, well, what can I do as a writer to help with the climate effort? So that it ended up in a short story collection. It's more of a story cycle with a character that weaves in and out of the short stories. And I personified nature. That was the big risk. So I keep hearing this phrase, nature's speaking loudly. Nature has a voice, right? And that people say it kind of in a ha-ha way. It's like, well, I'm going to give nature an actual voice. So nature weaves in and out. So that was the big risk. And it was a risk that I guess was worth it, because it won some awards. Like, go. And so what is that? So the writers out there, like, go with that risky thing and see, try it.
Yeah, that's very exciting. I wonder, this is making me wonder how much someday AI will know to take risks, like not just surprise, but feel that sort of fear that sometimes is so generative.
Yeah, it
of
is
creativity.
generative of creativity, right? Like
Mhm.
that's,
Yeah.
you step outside the boundaries of yourself. Like I hadn't ever done that before, and it didn't seem, I hadn't seen it. It's like it's not conventional. So the
Mhm.
boundary of self, the boundary of society is always thrilling.
Yeah,
Right?
definitely, completely. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's part of the point of going into the imaginary friend world, right? Even to you're processing society through being outside it and within it at the
Yeah.
same time. Okay, so I'll say give one last question from a patron. So Afterward has been considered a love story, a horror story, a mystery story, a sci-fi story, a morality play, etc., and a tale about the ethics of AI. Right? It's been described as all these things. How did you intend this story to be? Which are there any names maybe that don't fit as well for you, or does it all
Yeah.
work?
I think the foreground, the beating heart of it for me is a love story. And that made it human for me to write about. And the big challenge was to make the reader care about an AI being. And so that ended up into including the times that Haru was human to have you connect and emotionally engage. But I needed to emotionally engage too. And it was this love story. It was this man that understood her, that wanted to eat. Women are often under the pressure to have, fulfill the desires of the man. In this story, Haru wanted to fulfill her desires to become a mathematician. So it was the first time for someone to really love her in that way, to want her to have her desire and help her with it. So, just an intense love affair. That's what
Yeah.
comes to mind first.
For them to speak, they reference frequently through the book, like speaking to each other's expansive minds and that
Yeah.
thrill of talking to
Yeah.
someone new, and to being so, actually, I'm realizing how lovely that is, that part of the thrill of how they talk about how they love each other is loving, not knowing where their brain is going to go and how mysterious they are. And that
Yeah.
unknowability is, yeah, something that draws them to each other too. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. It's just really lovely, really lovely. I really like the book. If you haven't read it yet, please be sure to pick up a copy. I will get all my questions that I printed out. I don't always print out the questions for some reason.
Yeah.
Maybe because we're talking about technology, I was like, I'm gonna have paper today. I don't know.
Well, I want to thank you so much. Just really, really great questions. You're just such a good thinker, and you just really took deep care reading the book, and it just is such an honor. And to have San Mateo County Libraries, promote this book and be interested in it. I just am so grateful.
Thank you. We're so happy to have had you. And thanks, Nina, for the great conversation, for your sharing your immense research. And also I love how much ground we were able to cover about everything you know about this technology that I don't know really anything about. And then talking about your rich experience with writing too. It's been really, I'm buzzing. So we do. Also, there are some extra giveaway copies of Afterword that might be arriving tomorrow, Wednesday, to the following branches. First come, first serve. The giveaways, when they're at branches, they disappear right away. So just so you know, this is not a guarantee that they will be there, but at Atherton, Foster City, Half Moon Bay, Millbrae, and San Carlos, there will be very, very limited supplies of a few more if you want to grab them. And you, of course, can also borrow a library copy from our collection. Please check out San Mateo County Library's upcoming author talks at smcl.org/author talks. They will become a mixture of in-person and virtual talks going forward. And we would also appreciate it if you can tell us how SMCL did with this program at smcl.org/rate this event. And it is exactly 7:30. Look at that.
What a nice way to spend the evening, right?
Yeah. Have a wonderful night, everyone, and have a wonderful night,
Thank
Nina, as
you.
well. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Bye. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Okay.